G'day, I'm Glenn Torrens, this is Retro Rides, and today we're looking at this, a 1978 Volkswagen Beetle Karmann Cabriolet. It seemed like a really good idea at the time. It was the 1930s and cars were playthings of the rich and famous. But then a bloke came along promising his people a cheap, affordable, accessible car and a network of roads to drive them on. Would you have liked that? I would have. Trouble is, that bloke was Adolf Hitler, who not only started World War II, but became one of the most despised people in history. The car that Hitler promised his people was the Volkswagen. Translated quite literally means the people's car. This was one of the world's first affordable family cars. It was designed by a team led by Ferdinand Porsche, who of course went on to found the sports car manufacturer Porsche later on. The first Volkswagen was technically a very clever car. It was built on a platform chassis, which made it very easy to manufacture. The engine and all the suspension and the running gear was on a chassis, and then the body was placed on top. This four-seater body shell was actually quite stiff in sedan form. The Cabriolet wasn't quite so stiff. The Volkswagen had four-wheel independent suspension, which was quite significant in the 1930s. It was quite advanced. That was a big step ahead for the family car market in the 1930s, when this car was supposed to be sold. The engine's in the rear, and it has the benefit of being air-cooled. Now what that means for the layman is, in winter it doesn't freeze, and in summer it doesn't overheat as easily as a conventional engine. Now not many cars have ever been designed with the engine in the rear. Volkswagen is one, and Porsche of course is another. So with shared heritage from the same designer, Beetles and Porsches have the engine in the rear. And trust me, Beetle people will always remind you of that. Okay, I've got my happy shirt on. Let's go for a drive. I love Beetles. These things are so much fun. They actually don't have too much power, especially compared to today's cars. They just pull the stress out of you in a way, especially a convertible like this. By the 1960s, Volkswagen had shaken off its questionable origins and it had become one of the world's most popular cars. In fact, by 1972, Volkswagen became the biggest selling car in history. 15,007,034 cars had been produced, which was a new record. I love Beetles, they're so much fun. They really are. Sedan, convertible, doesn't really matter. I'm lucky enough to have driven both. In fact, the Beetle Cabriolet was one of the world's most popular drop-top cars. Between 1949, I think, and 1980, 330,000 of these things were built. That's in addition to all the sedans they made. The first Beetles arrived in Australia in 1953, and by 1954, thanks to government incentives, they were being assembled here. By the late 1950s, the early 1960s, the car was pretty much a 100% Australian manufactured. Beetles were always popular in Australia because they worked really well on rough roads. A big part of the reason why Volkswagen was good on rough roads is because first of all, it had lots of ground clearance. In fact, the Beetle's got more ground clearance than a lot of four-wheel drives of today. And secondly, because of the suspension. Lightweight, durable and tough, independent torsion bar suspension on most of them. And that really set the Beetle up as being a good farmer's car, a really good country car. But unfortunately, by the late 1960s, the Beetle's popularity had waned a little bit, despite the investment in the factory. Japanese cars had arrived, things like Toyota Corollas and Datsun 1200s and Mitsubishi Colts, and they started to eat into Volkswagen's small car market share. The last Beetles were assembled in Australia in 1976, and the car was kind of replaced by the new Golf. But the Beetle design lived on in other countries, most notably Brazil and Mexico. The last Beetles were manufactured in Mexico in 2003, and that was the absolute end of an era. But wow, what an era it was. 56 or 57 years of continuous production of what is essentially the same car. That's remarkable. It really is. This particular car is a 1978 Beetle Karmann Cabriolet. It's left-hand drive because it was imported from California about 12 years ago. California was a big market for Volkswagens, and it was a big market for these cabriolets. Most of the 330,000 that are made of these cabriolets were sold in America, particularly California. Sunny, beachy lifestyle. Great on a day like today with the roof peeled off. Although the first and last Beetles were quite similar in design, there were significant updates to the car in the early 1970s. One of the big things that anybody can tell is the rounded windscreen of the Super Beetle. Underneath the skin, the car received new front suspension, which gave the car a bigger boot. It got McPherson struts instead of the torsion bars. That gave the car a slightly better ride, better handling and better safety. But the real reason for the new nose was to make the car crash better. Not very nice to talk about, but that was the reality. Beetles aren't very safe. There's a few other little clues to a later model Beetle too. Firstly, the upright headlights. The early Beetles had little puppy dog headlights. The later cars had a more conventional flat glass. This is where things get a little bit controversial with Volkswagen enthusiasts. Some people like the early cars with the layback puppy dog headlights. Other people like the later cars, the 1970s stuff, that actually drive a bit better. So I guess it's a matter of personal choice, personal opinion as to whether you like a car that looks cooler or drives better. I know what I like. No matter which style you like, it's the 1970s cars that drive better. They've got a bit more power, they've got better brakes, they've got better handling and road holding. Something else that makes Beetles so appealing for enthusiasts is the fact that you can make them go really fast. When the first Beetles, especially in America, became cheap second-hand cars in the 1960s, hot rodders got hold of them and made them go real quick. Drag racing, big engines, made them faster than V8s. Good fun. All of these Beetles from the 1930s when they were first designed until the last in 2003 were powered by a 4-cylinder, flat 4, air-cooled engine. Most cars only had 3 speeds, but the 4-speed gave the Beetle good cruising ability. Of course, with the last Australian Beetles being assembled in 1976, it's a long time since you could buy a new one. But thanks to a really good core of enthusiasts and really good spare parts availability, there's still plenty of these Beetles out there to be enjoyed. These days, entry into a Beetle sedan, around about $10,000. Something like this imported fuel-injected Cabriolet, 45 to 50 for a really good one. The last of the traditional air-cooled Beetles was manufactured in Mexico in 2003. And in that time, 1946 to 2003, more than 21 million Beetles were made. It was a remarkably long production history from 1946 to 2003, 57 years. It's really only the traditional Land Rover that can boast being made for longer, 1948 to 2017. With such a long production history and so many people around the world driving these cars, it's no wonder they're such a fun, happy, respected classic car today. They made them for so long, they were so popular. These days there's lots and lots of spare parts available for them, and even though they're not a kid's first car anymore, you don't deliver pizzas in them or go to university, I reckon these things are going to survive as a usable classic for years, decades even. So that's the story of the Volkswagen Beetle. Have you got a story about a Beetle in your life? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, like and subscribe. I'm Glenn Torrance, this has been Retro Rides, we'll see you next time.